8 p.m. That which has occurred since I last put down this journal, which I then believed to have been the last time, has staggered my comprehension. I will recount only what I know for certain to be true. The pipe groaned as the lock wheel slowly turned against it, bending it like a branch until it slipped through the spokes and clattered to the floor. I rose and drew the revolver, trying to keep my hand from shaking as I thumbed back the hammer. The lock wheel spun to the end of its screw with a clank, and I held my breath as the heavy iron door swung wide on its squealing hinges. After everything I had imagined, dreaded, everything I built up in my mind to steel myself against, I was not prepared for the abominable reality. There was within me one lingering shred of doubt that fate could be so perverse. But I was wrong. It was worse. Infinitely worse than I ever could have conceived. 13 familiar shapes shambled one by one through the black portal. Hunched, crooked, and silent as the grave in which they should have been lain. They inched closer and closer until the cold violet light of our lantern shone fully and morbidly upon them. Their skin was blue and sallow, sunken and clinging to the bone and flecked with ice crystals. 13 pairs of glossy, bloodshot, wholly alien eyes gaped like bottomless pits from faces that I once knew. O'Grady was there, a deep and blood-caked indentation in his skull. Scott stood unevenly upon 2 smashed, misshapen legs. An ice-choked bullet hole marred the crown of Pascal's forehead, and a jagged gash divided Mickelson's. At the center of the cadaverous throng was the blackened carapace of Captain Bromberg. But for his charred, disintegrated visage they all bore the hollow, unfeeling countenance of death. But their eyes, they were like the eyes of wild beasts, covetous, and blazing with the primal ferocity of oblivion. They were the ghoulish shades of unwholesome terror that the merciful earth should always hide. And so horrified was I by the sight of them that before they had come within reach of me, I shut my eyes and put the gun to my head. What happened next happened so quickly that I am only now beginning to understand the sequence of events. I heard a gunshot, and for a split second I thought that it was all over. But then there came a strident, hissing sound from behind me, like a burst valve, and I realized that I had not pulled the trigger. Opening my eyes and spinning about, I beheld Von Arkham wearing what looked like a stratospheric oxygen mask over his nose and mouth. He stood with his arm outstretched, a smoking pistol in his hand. Following his aim, I turned my head and saw the other canister of Sutcliffe's surgical ether. A jet of gas spewing forth from the end where the valve had been shot off. I had barely enough time to grasp a notion of what was going on before the fumes reached my nostrils, and I blacked out. When I awoke, I was in a warm, brightly lit room. I was lying upon a table. Standing over me was a tall, austere-looking man in a frock coat and spectacles. He had a stethoscope to my chest and was listening to my heart. In retrospect, it should have been obvious that this individual meant me no harm and was only monitoring my vitals during my convalescence, but I came to in a state of exhilarated distress. I knocked the man's hand away with a sweep of my arm and leapt up from the table. Seeing a door, I immediately threw it open and raced down the corridor that it revealed. At the end of the hall, there was a flight of stairs leading to a set of low, weather-tight doors. I bounded up the steps and out through the unlocked doors. I found myself standing upon the deck of a ship, similar in its layout to that of the Revenant, but far more ostentatious in design. The deck beneath my feet was paneled with fine wood, but I could feel the metal beneath it. There were accents of polished brass everywhere I looked. The rails, the hatches, the cleats, the sconces. The envelope overhead was striped on its underside, but most likely armored above. Abaft I could hear the whir of twin propellers and the beating of fan wings off the sides. I had never seen a vessel of its like before. Bewildered by these new surroundings, it took me a moment to notice Von Arkham standing mid-deck before the portside rail, his mad-hatted head bowed and his gaze fixed on a point below us. I glanced over the side to where he was staring, and saw the decrepit hulk of the Revenant lying as impotently upon the glacier as it had since it first crashed 2 weeks ago. We were at a height of about 1,500 feet, and even from so high, the wreck, that nightmare from which I had inexplicably been spirited away, it still seemed so close. I started to approach Von Arkham, determined to have an explanation, when the Maverick turned fore and called out something I could not hear. Looking to the bow, I saw a young woman in a dark blue jumpsuit and goggles standing behind what appeared to be a pressure cannon on a turret, aimed at the Revenant. At Von Arkham's call, the woman nodded and took hold of the cannon's release valve. There was a resounding burst of pressure, and a shell was launched from the barrel of the great weapon, shooting earthward and landing on the deck of the Revenant with a distant metallic peal. There was a beat, and then a deafening eruption as the Revenant was consumed in a fiery conflagration of such immensity that it could not have been caused by a single grenade. Doubtless the shell had ignited the surgical ether that Von Arkham had released with his bullet. I watched as the Revenant and all of its horrors burned. I watched, and Von Arkham watched, and neither of us moved nor broke our gaze, until finally the glacier split, and the flaming skeleton of that devil craft was entirely engulfed by the waves. And there let it remain until the sky falls. Von Arkham conducted me below deck to a cabin with a cot and an empty chest. He told me that they would take me back to Halifax and that I should get some rest, but fed up with being kept in the dark, I did not stay put. I waited until I heard his footsteps dwindle down the corridor, and then furtively made my way after him. I followed him to the quarterdeck where the rest of his meager crew were waiting in the stern cabin, and pressed my ear against the door. Their conversation was muffled, but I have learned that this vessel is called the MHS Hysteria, and that Von Arkham is her captain. They spoke extensively about Dr. Sutcliffe, and someone named Herbert West, a colleague of Sutcliffe's, or perhaps a forerunner in his field, judging by the way they spoke about Sutcliffe, carrying on West's legacy. There was a great deal of talk about some chemical solution being 10 times as effective in gaseous form. Von Arkham mentioned something about the 4 canisters that were stored in Bromberg's cabin, and the mishap with the flare gun that torched it. That was all I could overhear with any clarity. It was evident that they had no intention of telling me anything, so I went about seeking my own answers. I found Von Arkham's cabin unlocked and slipped inside, closing the door behind me. Volumes could be written on the eclectic disorder of that madman's quarters, yet among the clutter of curios, contraptions, and objects that utterly defied explanation, there was one item that drew my notice above all else. After every inconceivable episode of the past 2 weeks, it is odd that such a small thing should give me such unrest. But my state of mind, my philosophy, everything I thought I knew has been put out of joint. Upon a desk heaped high with scraps of paper and assorted instruments, I spotted a small brown leather-bound book, identical to this very journal but for the aged condition of the leather and the pages. At first I thought it no more than a mere coincidence, until I drew closer and read my own initials engraved into the tattered cover. It was by reflex alone that I reached for the book, for what was left of my reason implored me not to touch the damned thing. But that voice is just a whisper now. I picked up the book, opened the cover, and upon the pages I read my own words, in my own script, words I had put down only hours before, but faded and time-worn as the yellowing antique pages they were written on. I have returned to my cabin now, and here I will remain until we reach Nova Scotia. When we make port there, I will leave this aberrant company and seek to find permanent lodgings. I will seek employment in the shipyards, or perhaps at a factory, for I am done with the aeronaut's trade. When I first put my boots on the deck of an airship, I was young and venturesome. I wanted to see the world. Now, I think I've seen too much of it. Whatever wanderlust I once followed is gone. The world can keep its darkest secrets. I want no part of them. As for this journal, I will lock it away in a strongbox, store it under the floorboards of some dark room, and never think of it again.